Hey Ravish, so welcome for the open house session today. I think to get started, it'll just be lovely to hear about sort of your journey into product management, and then we can have a deep dive into the session and the fellowship that we have planned.
Sounds good. Um, Welcome, everyone. My name is Ravish, and really excited for this. I'm hoping that through the program, I get to talk to some of you, learn a little bit about your lives, and if possible, also help you in whatever stage of this journey you're at. By way of introduction, I currently head the products team at indiagold. We're a financial fintech platform. We partner with a lot of lending institutions, and we're essentially in a neo-banking space trying to digitize banking as it stands today. And that's a booming sector in general in the industry right now. Lots of exciting stuff happening in the fintech space. Uh, and I'm hoping that through the course, I can share some of my learnings with you. Previous to that, I've been a consultant, worked with a few management consulting firms. So there was a transition there. I also spent some time in the policy space trying to find myself and also help me get more on the ground and connect with the roots. Now that experience comes in handy with the users. Um, and did some and studied economics with a few fellowship programs based out of Beijing and DC. I've been doing this for a while now, and my goal is to share some of the learnings that I've gathered, some of the industry leaders I've interacted with, many of whom we're going to bring on to this. In the cohort, you'll see a lot of guest lectures by some of the most amazing and people in the product space. Um, through the next few minutes, what I was hoping to do was instead of showing a presentation, just show you what we will be doing on a day-to-day basis. So I'll take the first week as an example to show what this program might look like. It's not gonna be gyan bazi from my side, to be honest. The one thing that I've learned and something that I've observed, and it's recognized across everyone, is that theory works less in product management. At the end of the day, if you build something, there's nothing like it. If you build something and you put it in your CV, it helps you get the right jobs. It helps you enter the door. And it also helps you build the right skill sets. So, through the course, our objective is in the next 6 weeks, the way we've structured our course modules is in a way that each week you build one key skill set and you start on the project. So when we say start from user psychology and wireframing, we begin with problem solving and how to conceptualize a problem. As we slowly go forward, we also consider aspects like growth and how would you plan to monetize this, for example. In the end, we're going to have, on the last week, we will have a pitch session, a YC inspired demo session of sorts, where we'll be bringing in a few venture capitalists and angel investors. I'm not going to disclose their names right now, for you to pitch your project to them. And you're going to be working in pairs for this, just so that it's easier. So, what I'm going to do is right now, and please, if you have any questions, just keep posting them in the chat, share them across to Varia. I can't see all of you. So, but if you see me, just keep posing in those questions and I'll answer them as we go. So I'll quickly share my screen and start this off. Right. So as I mentioned, actually, even before that, something to take note of. So I'm sure that some of you have started your journey in product management. Some of you are beginning to do that. And this was an article I was reading today early in the morning, and it really stuck with me. Is that when you look at the top cream of people in this space, in any space, for example, they've put in a lot of effort to go there. Like the number of people, if you would just put like a bell, it's not a bell curve actually, but if you were to put at the number of people who are really, really good at what they do, they're very few. And it's easier to go from, say, the average 50 percentile to the top 10 percentile, but extremely hard to go from the 10 percentile to the top 1 percentile. That's the hardest stretch you do. And if And but then what is it like? What skills do you need to have to be able to be like one of the best in the industry in product management? The answer is you don't need to have one key skill set that would just make you like a super PM as such. Instead, what you need to have is to stack those skills. So you have two different skills and you stack them. So, for example, let's say design. You understand design well. You technical understanding. You understand tech well. Your understanding of analytics. You're good at being able to crunch numbers, draw funnels, create models as such. And you have the agency in you to even go and track those out and work on them because those are the problems you're trying to solve. Each of these skills, when you try and stack all of them into your kitty, this is my name is Ravish, I am these are my skill sets, and I tried to stack them all together. There are very few people in the market who have all of these skills together. In fact, just yesterday we were doing a panel with Inc. 42 with some of the great PMs in India, and all of them said that, especially while going from 0 to 1 in any product, it was extreme. The best people that they worked with were those who had multiple skills and could transition and could understand what the designer wanted, what the tech would need, what the user wants, what the business needs, what the salesperson wants. So, as a course, if we were to think about what you walk away with, we have these 4 or 5 key skill sets that we would want you to stack upon each other. Each of these skills, when you put them together, you will probably it works wonder. One of the reasons I feel I was able to succeed in this role was because I could talk to the engineer, I could talk to the designer, I knew what was happening on the business side, and then by combining all of these things together, I could come up with a possible solution which maybe others could not. So, what we'll try and do is in these 6 modules, and let me know if my screen is too small or you can't see it, but we have these 6 modules. Within each, we have certain structures that you like to play in. And we'll start with wireframing and user psychology. Within this, we're going to have certain, wherever needed, uh, we'll have elements of tech involved. It's not possible to entirely think about designing and structures without thinking about system designs or information and UI controls and architecture. So within this, for example, there are 3 topics that you'd learn: how to design user interface controls. Uh, these are some of the words that you would probably not have heard of. You could imagine that it'd be pretty easy to come up with an app design. You can just design boxes and stuff like that. But in the last uh, 20, 30 years of apps being built, a lot of things have been standardized. So, for example, your controls and information are how should the navigation within the app or your desktop app or whatever product you're building be, the design principles that you should know of, uh, the libraries and components that make the structure possible, the base of whatever you're trying to design possible. There'll be user psychology sessions because I think a lot of times, especially when you're coming up with products, um, when you're coming up with new products, it's about ensuring that you're able to achieve a product market fit of sorts. For that, you need to try out different things. You need to experiment a bit. And then afterwards, then post then, you're trying to be precise, trying to create subtle nudges and things in your system to grow and really get onto that flywheel effect. So it's also about your user research. So there are certain standard heuristics and scorecards, and how do you scientifically do some of the things that you would anyway imagine as a good PM you're probably doing or you imagine yourself doing. But how do you add that one level extra scientific element so that you can impress your bosses or maybe just actually learn something new? There's the other important angles, especially when it comes to user psychology, is how to use user psychology to properly position and communicate what is needed. So One, a wrongly worded error message, for example, can have a hell of a difference in user experience. So it's easy to think that, oh, I'm just drafting a simple error message, but say it, it it gets more complicated if you go one level up. So for example, if you are building an e-commerce website, on the checkout page you have your payment gateway attached. Now a payment gateway will say give you an error message that payment failed. But if you go behind the scenes, there are 5 6 different reasons. Actually, there are 25 different reasons why a payment could fail, and according to each, there should be a different message. So if the payment is stuck with the bank, then how do you, with the payee's bank, then what happens if the payment was declined by that bank and it's not your fault? What do you communicate to the user? If the payment got stuck at your end, or worse, if the payment got stuck in between the intra-bank network, the SFMS, these are all complicated things that look easy on the outside, but behind that there's some amount of understanding technology states happen. And accordingly, how do you position that error message that can either cause someone to complain on social media that this is such a bad product, or take corrective action to solve for that problem? And then there are obviously certain mental models that can help you stay on track. You should, if you work on first principles, you'll remember what you built. We will also be going through certain cohorts on analytics. You'll be learning a few tools through each of these. For wireframing, we'll be largely using mockups. Although it's agnostic, you can do whatever you want. I'll be training you on mockups because I find that to be good for beginners as such. Within analytics, again, you're free to use whatever you want Python's tools to do the exercises and the case studies that would be given to you, but just plain and simple Excel would also work. Um, Within managerial skills, now, by definition, a product manager is managing something or someone. The challenges is that you're oftentimes, especially while you're starting out, you're not managing people directly. You're instead influencing without authority, as they say. Now, this is something hard to pull off. What do you make? How do you convince all stakeholders to do what, to get what you want, or just come up with the right approach to standardize the set processes for your own product so that you're able to run this? In some organizations, and this is not common to all, but in certain organizations, the product manager is also the project and project manager and the scrum master. So you need to be familiar with how to create epics and tools within Jira or whatever tool you're using to make sure that there is that everything is sane, at the expense of not having better words. If projects and product and the development cycle is not properly managed, things can go very wrong very fast. So, how do you run scrums and be agile with your roadmaps, and how to plan those roadmaps are certain essential managerial skills that you will need to take up. And at many points, in the same day itself, you tasked to make 10 important decisions that make or break something. How do you make those? How do you prioritize stuff? A product manager is never able to make everyone happy. It's extremely hard to do. How do you manage those relationships then? I think these are important skills that determine your success in this role. We'll also do a deep dive in fintech in case any of you are interested in getting into this sector. I'd be happy to help you out. We'll share some of the new developments and products being built, and obviously, I thought just an additional one level of what's happening in this space to show you if you're interested to help you transition into that role. So now what I'm going to do is I'll share with you how we're going to structure each of these modules and what it would look like. I'll take the first one, for example. So let's say we're learning about wireframing in the first week. Before we get into the class, you're going to have certain reading material. This is going to be just like it is at any other B school or master's program. These are, for example, I'm going to trim them down for you, but for example, information architecture. I'm going to highlight sections from the book and the pages that you need to read, for example. And these are going to be interesting readings for you. So, and you learn what, how, when you design products and you create, before you even begin wireframing on pen and paper, how do you categorize the movement, the user's movement from one step to another? How do you visualize that journey? Is what you're gonna you need. It's better if you read something beforehand. Then there are heuristics, for example, that you should be aware of. These heuristics, for example, this one is open, is visibility or system status. Say, as a product manager, you wireframing and you design a screen where when I press the checkout button, an order is placed. Now, as a user, if you don't in that wireframe also include a transient screen, a status screen where the person can actually see their order status while that payment, and within that the multiple hops are being made, what is the user going to do? They're going to keep pressing the button again and again and again and again and again. In the backend, you would have placed 10 orders. Payment would have been just for one of them. These are certain problems that I think it sounds simple, that obviously you need to have a screen in between your action screen and your final result. But these are certain basics that each of you should know and always have in the back of your mind while wireframing. Or, for example, the third one. This is, if you're a nerd, this is more about user experience design, and generally the law of UX. Again, I don't expect all of you to, but there are case studies in this from Google, Apple, Facebook, and a bunch of other players. And this is a little bit more scientific if you are interested in it. For example, this is the duty threshold. Is that when you're creating products and system, provide system feedback between a certain amount of time, so that to increase productivity. Again, you do not need to know the theory behind things, but it's good if you know that something like this exists. It'll remain in the back of your mind therein. So once you've done this, we're going to have a session in this, and then you're going to walk away with a case study, for example. Now, the first week's case study is to design and wireframe a product. I'll show you what the end result looks like. These are wireframes, for example, built on for a hotel booking app. Um, how and you could share your case responses as you want. There's going to be an open call, but if you look at the, let's say, the information architecture, there's a bottom nav bar, there's a top menu bar, these are things that you would add. These are components, and the iconography, how do you take into consideration? So this is what's happening in the front end. But how do you come to this state? How do you design this wireframe? You would need to learn first how the technical side of this. How do APIs work, for example? So, for example, we look at the this is the Agoda API platform. It's an open source tool. You're going to use this to, for example, if somebody is coming up to you, if you were to create an app, there's an API that feeds the information of the hotel into the front end. How does that work? So, for example, they have a feed. They via a content API, and the data comes in a CSV format. If, say, somebody is searching for something, how do you read these parameters? You don't need to write the code yourself, but you need to understand how things work. For example, if I say I click a book button. Now, within the book button, for example, dozens of things can happen while that product is being built. Some of them, they've listed them down here. So that's why I thought this case study will be easy for the first timer. What if the price changes? How do you design that in your wireframe? What if the room is no longer available? What sort of UI controls would you use to say the room is no longer available? Would you create a new screen to show just this message? Would you use a toast notification? Would you change the state? Would you design the state of your product? Each of these decisions you need to take, and it will be easier for you to do that if you understand what is happening in the back end and how things work in the back. So to a novice, it might look like simple wireframing means clicking a book button and the hotel gets booked after the payment is successful. But there are so much more that goes within it. So, for example, now say if you the what they've designed is they've created a pre-check API to check all of that. So what they've done is instead of handling this problem in the front end, they've handled it in the back end itself. But how to reflect this in the front end will be your job while wireframing. Uh, if say everything is successful, you go to the book API. Now, remember the law, you need to show the right state to the user at every time. While this API call and the post and receive, the response is being received from the vendor, what you show to your user. And once it is done, how is the confirmation flow shown? And again, you do not need to, this is one example of a JSON, you don't need to learn how to code. And most product managers don't read JSONs themselves. But if you want to be just at one level up and understand what is happening, you can, it'll help. For example, and I'll tell you how. So, for example, see the details that are required in a pre-check API. For a pre-check API, what you need is the check-in, check-out, user country, hotel ID, and from the room, the type, retail, the double, all of this information. Now, a product manager who would not have gone through all of this and started wireframing before understanding this, it's possible that they would have missed out some of this information and not captured it in the front end. And what's going to happen, like, for example, if they forgot the room type, for example, or the rate plan, or what's going to happen is that the dev is going to ask, hey, there's nothing coming to me. What do I pass in rate plan? I don't see any information. You go to the front end person, you say, hey, the checkout and the rate plan was missing in the design. He said, but you didn't give it to me in the wireframe. That's going to cause issues. Your product is going to get, life cycle is going to get delayed, so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to communicate here is you can still do wireframing in a lot of things by just starting out. But if you add some of these skill sets, like my understanding of the visual controls on the front end, my understanding of backend stack, my understanding of what the consumers want, and with my user research, you can combine all of this information and stack up your skill sets one on top of the other to to be like the top 10% in the space. And that's what our goal is going to be through the course, is across each week you build and develop one skill set. You add one skill to your kitty. You learn one or two tools every 2 weeks. And through all of that, we're hoping that you can gain either an entry into the product management space, or you can be a better PM if you're already one. Um, I'm going to pause here. Don't mind, I'm sorry about my screen, but I'm going to take a quick pause here to answer any questions that you might have, given that this is an open house. Uh, so um, I, I see that there are a couple of those in the chat.
Yeah,
Um,
we have one about PMs as generalist, but
mhm.
technical depth is important. So, for the fellowship, I know there are some technical things that we'll be covering, but do you want to
Right.
share a little bit about how it's split and how you're thinking about the technical versus generalist
Right. So
and the yeah.
the debate is not between the technical versus generalist. A good generalist is a good generalist because they know some of the technical stuff. They're not technologists, but they do have some understanding. That's why they are good generalist. So it's not a contradiction. There's no inherent contradiction as such. And I would strongly recommend that you know some stuff. If you were to just limit few things, I would say systems design. Alex Shu, for example, has a great book that we'll be using through the course. Now, it's very simple. System design for a PM, if I were to explain it in a gross overgeneralization, would be designing the right flow charts so that when your devs and your UX, UI people or designers, whatever you want to call them, come together to start building, they have that flow in mind. And it's usually not the PM working alone. A PM is usually someone on the whiteboard drawing this out together with everyone in place. So how to design the right system, because I think it's a good skill. You can be a generalist without knowing all of this as well, but if you know that, you will be ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. The next question I have is for those who are already in product management, but in sort of the early days.
Mhm.
So, how would I know you briefly touched upon how the fellowship will sort of help them in adding new skills, but is there anything specific in terms of just thinking about career progression and leadership within product management that they can think about through the fellowship?
Right. I think so. One of the advantages of a cohort-based course versus a Coursera, something like a Coursera, is that here you have direct access, a one-on-one access. And if you were to take this up, I would want to learn more about you. And I'm in. This is the first time I'm doing it, so I'm invested in you. Uh, I would not give generic advice for everyone. A lot of I'll drop my WhatsApp number in the chat right now. I think the advice needs to be tailored to each individual. So, and the reason I say that, if you're say an early stage person who loves their job and who is given the opportunity, I would have different advice for you to go get ahead in your product. But if you're someone who does not feel like you are able to make a tangible difference, you need some other sort of support, it's a different story altogether. So, to categorize all advice as generic will be wrong. And I would recommend this be a one on one session rather than generic for somebody looking to go ahead. So, if, for example, you're an early stage product analyst or APM uh, at a young startup going from 0 to 1 versus say if you are a early stage PM at a large company like a Microsoft, things are going to be extremely different from you for you. On a day-to-day basis, you would be navigating very different things. For example, a Microsoft expectation for you to do well would be you'd have to be very precise with your documentation, the way your managerial style. It's possible that you would, in a large firm, you would not have access, or your responsibilities would not include all of these things, and instead you need to focus on just one element. For example, you're a Google Maps uh, PM, early stage PM. You would be asked to go deep dive. Documentation is going to be huge for you. I know how to align people at Google is going to be very different from how to say align people at an early stage startup. So keep that in mind. Help me also understand what your expectations are, where you are in your journey, so that I can tailor the right advice for you. I hope that that makes sense, Varya.
No, absolutely. And I think as you rightly said, the beauty of doing cohort based courses is a lot of peer mentorship as well. So you will be learning with other people who are in a similar journey as you, and you can have more one on one interactions, specific interactions. We have very interesting guest speakers who will be joining in as well, so they can share their perspective because I think all they can share is perspective as opposed to,
Sorry
a
to
guide.
interrupt. Talking of guest speakers, we have in our opening session we have Kaushik. Kaushik was previously a
Yeah.
director at Meta and now at Stripe. We don't like to use his company names, but that's what it is. So the first guest lecture is going to be how to product manage your own career. So some of the skills, say themes that you talk about, like being agile with your product. Why don't you be agile with your career? If that means that you need to apply the same principles that you would while building something or building a company or building a product, why don't you do that same thing, the same principles with your career? If that means experimenting a few different things early on, and once you do that, you push, do that. So there'll be other mentors through the course as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's also another thing, just learning. There's no right way to get something like product management right, but just taking from different people's perspective and trying and iterating as much as possible. The next question I have was around just timings and duration. So, obviously, the course schedule, we'll be sharing that with the fellows, but in terms of the assignments and reading, how much time do you think one person should keep in a week during the course of the fellowship? And
I think
also, maybe closer to the demo day because that will take a little bit more time.
that's true. That's true. Again, I would say if I were to do the readings and stuff, I would probably take 2 to 3 hours in a week. But I would recommend you keep 8 to 10 hours throughout the week. This includes the actual sessions as well.
Yeah, makes sense. The next is around assignments. So, one is if you can give some sort of flavor or an example, and the second is are they industry focused? Because we do sort of take a few fintech examples. So, will like the fellows have option to pick assignments across sectors, or will it be focused on fintech?
No, no, no. They're not going to be focused on fintech. So, for example, the first assignment, I can show you one sample assignment that one of the students did. This is while wireframing the states. So, they, for example, mention what the notes for the UX. This is the same hotel booking example we saw. So, you'll have access to the API on Agoda's platform, and then you're supposed to create this. There are intricacies involved here. For example, like you'll see, why use a bottom sheet and a small button instead of, say, using a full screen or some other, so using a modal or an interstitial banner or something of that sort, wherever needed. There are system level things that would get involved. For example, you're passing what API to use and what identifier to pass. So that means that information should be there. There are certain things like controls and navigation. If you say like this person has highlighted well with arrows, so this means that when your wireframe goes to the designer or the developer, they'll be easy to do. Now, again, what they've done is, for example, they've shown what different error messages would look like. What to show in a 100 error, what to show in a 101 error. And similarly, again, developer notes just make things easier. So this is one example of what the assignment would be. We will obviously go through the tool first in the session. And I'm assuming that if you've done the readings before and with the session, it should be pretty easy for you to take up. Rest, they don't need to be perfect. You are not here to, this is not a typical Indian school where you're competing with others. You are competing with yourself. So your objective should be to get better at whatever stage you're at.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And with that, I think we're done with most of the questions that we'd received. But before we conclude today's session, I'd just like you to, Ravish, once and finally just summarize maybe the fellowship for people. And if there was one takeaway they should have from today's open house, what should it be?
One key takeaway, if you want to build certain skills, we're not going to be doing Gyan. There's going to be hard work. I would recommend you not join it if you think you don't want to do that. the focus will be on building the right skills. The only way to do that is by actually getting involved in doing what's been planned for you. A lot of effort has gone into putting all of this out, um, and we're hoping you capitalize on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with that, Ravish, thank you so much for taking up and doing this session, walking us through your journey into product management and sharing how you've thought about the fellowship. For those who are joining in and listening, so the applications or the registrations for the fellowship are right now open. We start with the first cohort on May 8th, so you'll have time up till then to sign up. And we have limited seats, so we'll close registrations as soon as we hit the number. So if you need any help, you can always write to me, and I'll be there to help you with that. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I hope to get to learn more about some of you through this course.